Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are going to pick it up at the beginning of Perek Daled, chapter 4, Perek Daled. And the truth is, let's see. Yeah, we'll pick it up from there. Okay, so just to review quickly. Quickly review. We basically have Perek Aleph, which is essentially the challenge of Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah in terms of eating the king's food. That was really Perek Aleph. Perek Beis is Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the interpretation of that with the body of the statue and the different metals representing the Arba Malchuyos, the four kingdoms. And then we have Perek Gimel last week, which was Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah thrown into the furnace for not bowing down to the idol. So this week, or the statue. So this week we have Perek Daled, and we're going to work on another dream of Nebuchadnezzar. So the truth is, the story for this, I'm not going to read this part inside, but the story actually begins at the end of Perek Gimel. And at the end of Perek Gimel, I'm trying to follow along, let me get to there. Sure. So at the end of Perek Gimel, Nebuchadnezzar actually says that he is sending out, he's writing a letter, it says, to all of the different nations who live on earth. And he basically proclaims that, Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the one God in heaven, and he's really the only one who has any power over anything and can do anything. Okay, and that's the background for Perek Daled. And now we begin Daniel Perek Daled, chapter 4. So, again, I'm going to read some psukim here and then just fill in the others just with the summary. So, Pasuk Aleph, Anan Nebuchadnezzar, Shalei Habeis B'Veisi V'Ra'anan B'Hechli. So, Perek Daled begins with Nebuchadnezzar, and he's in his palace, and everything is fine. And once again, round 2, Chelam Chazeis V'Dachalinani. So he has a dream, V'Dachalinani, and he is frightened by it. V'harhorin al mishkavi, he has these thoughts while he's lying in bed. V'chazvei reishi v'halunani, and he's completely broken up about this. And what do you think he does? Again, the next few psukim, he calls all of the wise people of Bavel, and nobody can help him once again. So pasuk Hey, va'ad acharein al kadamai Daniel. So in the end, who comes? Along comes Daniel again. Dishmei Belshazzar, who has already been named Belshazzar, keeps repeating that to remind us he's been named this because he's, been made into a god, so to speak there. V'diruach Elohim Kadishin Bey, he has the spirit of God in him. V'chelma Kadamohi Amres. Okay, so Daniel is called in to interpret the dream. So just one point here, and for the rest of this parak, really, I'm just going to read the dream and then we'll go back and kind of discuss it. But just to point out something that struck me here. So the Malbim asks the following question, which is, Daniel has already proven that he's quite successful at this. And so much so that he convinced Nebuchadnezzar. Last time he told him the dream, Nebuchadnezzar said, I believe in God. That's it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one and only. He's great. So the Malbim asks a basic question, which is, now that he has a dream in round 2, you would think the first person he would call would be Daniel, because everyone in Bavel, all the, so to speak, wise people in Bavel, clearly are not that wise, or not as wise as Daniel, because they don't have the help from Hashem. So you'd think he would go straight to Daniel. So it's interesting. The Malbim says, what I think he's saying, is that Nebuchadnezzar sensed that the first dream was like a global type of dream and had like huge ramifications. He maybe just couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt like there was something large about that. And the Malbim says, this dream, he says, Chashav hamelech shehu chalom pashut mishafal hamadrega. It was like not such an important dream. So he says essentially that he believed, you know why Daniel got the first dream right? Because God cares about the big picture of things. So that he will convey. But God, this dream, he had a sense that this was just a dream about like his personal life or something about him. And he said, how could that be that God would be interested to convey that to me? That struck me as something very interesting because, again, we're talking about things we could learn from Nebuchadnezzar. So that I think is, a very, very Jewish outlook, right? We do not believe that, right? Sometimes people get stuck in that and they think, who am I? I'm nothing. God cares about the big people or the big picture. And I'm just, like the Malbim says here, like shafal, something unimportant. And Nebuchadnezzar says, how could it be that Daniel, it's not possible that Daniel would have this information because God's not really talking to me. It can't be that he's talking to me, but indeed he's obviously going to be. Let's start that stuck out of me. So what happens? Pasuk 7. So in Pasuk Zion, he now starts to tell Daniel his dream. So this is where I'm going to read the Pasukim Pasuk by Pasuk, just so we get a clear image of what the dream is. V'chezvei reishi al mishkavi. So this is the dream I had when I was lying in bed. Chazei haves, I saw, va'alu ilan. So that's the same as the Hebrew word ilan. There was a tree. Begoy ara, planted in the ground, v'rume sagi, and it was extremely tall. Pasuk ches, riva ilana uskif. This tree was massive, rav, it was great. Uskif, and very powerful. The rume yimte lashmaya. The tree reached all the way up to heaven. V'chazose lasof kol ara, and the tree could be seen from the ends of earth. Afye shapir, it had beautiful leaves. V'inbe sagi, and many, many fruits. Umazon lakola bay, and there was enough to provide sustenance for all things on this tree. Tichosohi, under the tree, tatleel chevas bara, the animals of the field took shelter under it. Uba'anfohi, and in the tree's branches, yiduran tzipare shamaya, tzipor, the birds of the heaven hung out. Umine, and from it, yitzin kol bisra, all flesh, all humanity, you could say, I mean mankind, but all bisra, all basar, all living things were sustained from this tree. Okay, so big tree, huge tree, lots of great adjectives describing all the stuff on the tree. Everyone's getting something from the tree. Pasuk Yud, chazei haves bechazvei reishi al mishkavi. I saw. Then what happened? Step 2 of the dream. Alu ir v'kadish. Ir v'kadish means a holy.
CL. CL.
Sorry, what? Okay. Ir v'kadish. Ir v'kadish is a holy angel, I think. Yeah. Min shemaya nachis, comes down from heaven. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Karei v'chayil, and it calls out in this grand voice. V'chein amar, and what does this angel say? Godu ilana, chop down the tree, v'katzitzu anfohi, and another way of saying like chop down its branches. Ataru afye, spread out its fruit. Ataru afye, spread out its leaves. Ubadaru inbe, and scatter its fruit. Tinud chevsa min tachtohi, let all the animals leave the tree. B'tziparaya min anpawi, and all the birds should fly away. And then, pasuk Yud Beis, 2 more pasukim for the dream. Biram, however, ikar sharshohi ba'ara shivuku, the main part of the tree, we would call the stump, should remain in the ground. And now we're going to do something I have to point out, which you won't get unless I point this out, and Mepharshim speak this out. This is a little odd. We've been talking until now about a tree. Right now, we're going to describe something that does not sound like a tree anymore. So it's a little bit odd. So all the Mepharshim say the dream kind of switches now from a tree to a person. Okay, we've been talking about a tree and all the stuff happening to the tree. We're now switching gears, and now there's like a person in the dream. And what happens to the person in the dream? Uve'esor di parzelu nachash, and in chains of iron and copper, bidisa divara. This person will be chained down and to the grasses of the field. Ubetal shemaya yitztaba, and it will get soaked by the dew from heaven. V'im chevsa chalake, and with the animals of the field, ba'asav ara, it will eat grass like the animals of the field. Okay. Liveve min anasha yeshanon, its heart will be changed from the heart of a person, ulavav cheva yisihivle, and it will be given the heart of an animal. Vishiva idanin yachlefun alavi, and 7 time periods will pass while the person is in this state of like being like animal-like. Okay. And that's basically it, essentially. So that's what Nebuchadnezzar says to Daniel. So essentially, to recap, because this dream is going to keep, it repeats the dream like 3 times in the parak. He says the dream, and then Daniel's going to say the dream back to him and say that's what it means, and then the dream's going to be fulfilled. So essentially, you have this big tree, lots of fruit on it, lots of animals hanging out under it, lots of birds in its branches, and along comes a malach. Malach chops down a tree, and at that point, the stump is in the ground, and then somehow there's this person there. And the person ends up basically turning into almost like an animal type of creature, right? And it's drinking dew, it's eating grass, it's hanging out with the animals, and it almost like turns into some kind of animal. Okay, so what'd you say? Correct. Oh, that's a good point, right? It says it's like chained down to the grass of the field, yet amongst the animals. Okay, so. Okay, this is the dream. And let's take a look at Pasuk Tezayin. So now Daniel's turn. So Edayin Daniel Dishmei Belshazzar, Ishtomem Kasha Achada. So Daniel is there and he's absolutely Ishtomem. He's like astonished. He's like flustered. He doesn't know how to handle this. V'rayonohi Yivahalune. And his thoughts are like he's now alarmed. Anei Malka Amar Belshazzar. So Nebuchadnezzar says to Daniel, hey, like sir, right? Chelma, upreshe, don't relax. He sees that he's getting nervous. He says, calm down, right? Anei Belshazzar v'amar. So Daniel responds to Nebuchadnezzar and he says, Mari chelma l'sanach upishrei la'arach. Like we would say halavai, right? Halavai, this dream should be fulfilled to your enemies, right? Which is his way of saying, I've got some bad news for you. Okay? Now, the Meforshim already deal with this question of how can he say such a thing to Nebuchadnezzar, right? He's got a bad dream. He feels the interpretation means something negative for Nebuchadnezzar. So how can he turn to him and say to him, I hope this is fulfilled through your enemies, right? Who are Nebuchadnezzar's enemies? Right? They're really the Jews.
I mean, the Jews are conquered, they're not necessarily their enemy.
That's about, okay.
He has real enemies, the Persians.
Okay, that's a good point. Good. Okay, that's sorry. So Ari's making a good point. Maybe the Jews are. I mean, at this point, he's already conquered them, so they're not necessarily in conflict, right? They're like under him. So whoever knows his enemies. Okay, so that's a more simple way to go about it. Another possible answer that some of the Mefarshim say is that he's saying it to Nebuchadnezzar, but he keeps saying the word Malka, the king. So he's referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So meaning he's saying something to him in a way that's kind of not clear what he's saying. He's really referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he's speaking to Daniel. But Ari, I like Ari's answers. Right. This dream should be fulfilled on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's enemies. Good. Who's that? Right. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's enemies. Very good. Rav is saying is Nebuchadnezzar. Very good. So we'll see what happens. So now he explains the dream. Okay. Now we're going to see, before we even see the explanation of the dream, it's hard because I already learned the parak. But if I were to ask you, if you haven't learned the parak, right? Who do you think the tree is in the dream, right? The malach is coming and chopping down a tree. Who's the tree? Most probably. Right? Most probably it's Nebuchadnezzar.
If Daniel is nervous about telling you that, it sounds like.
Good. So it's interesting. The question is asked, like, why couldn't anyone figure this out? I mean, it wasn't rocket science. Like, really, no one could figure out the man is having a dream about a tree, and the tree is chopped down, and there's this thing that's turning. I mean, it seems a little funny that person would turn into an animal, but like, okay, like we get the point. Hashem's kind of after him, perhaps. So one shot maybe is really maybe they couldn't figure it out, or they couldn't see that such a bad thing would ever happen to Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe they couldn't envision that. Okay, he could, right. So Rev Yaakov Meidan. Oh, right. So I'm saying maybe that would be a reason why he and the people around think that this is, something that.
I don't want to tell him. I mean, the other parts maybe not.
Oh, very good. So Rev Yaakov Meidan says what Ari says.
I think your time is up, and the dream says that you're in trouble.
Excellent.
You may not be happy with that.
Right. So that seems to be the Pashup shot, is that it's not necessarily that here, notice, Here, the first time with the dream, what did Daniel do? It says he goes home and he davens to Hashem. Right here, he just answers it right on the spot. That doesn't mean he's not getting help from Hashem, but Rabbi Yaakov Meidan suggests what Ari says. He says that Mistama, the dream kind of spoke for itself, but everyone was just scared. No one had the guts to say it to him. And here Daniel is, and he's the one who has the guts to relay it to him. So what does he say? So now let's see the interpretation, and then we'll discuss like what really is going on here. So he says as follows, in Pasuk Yud Tes. Pasuk Yud Tes, 19. So I'm going to skip to 19, Yud Tes, and we're going to see Daniel's interpretation of the dream. He says, Antu Malka, you, my friend, you Nebuchadnezzar, you're the king. Di Ravas uskeft, you're grand and you're very powerful. Uravusach Rivas, Umetas Lishmaya, Vishaltanach Lesofara, and you have dominion over the whole earth. Okay. And then he says, and then you saw in the dream that the angel was cutting it down. Skip to Pasuk 21, Chaf Aleph. Dina Pishra Malka. This is the interpretation. Ugezeras Ilahi. This is a decree from God in heaven. Dimetas al Mare Malka, which is going to happen to you. So he says, Vilach Tardin min Anasha. You, Nebuchadnezzar, are going to be cut down. And what's going to happen? Something sounds very strange. Lach Tardin min Anasha. You're going to be like banished from humanity. V'im chevas bara laheve medorach. You're going to live with the animals. V'isba ketorin lach yita'amun. You're going to eat grass like cows do. Umital shemaya lach mitzabin. And you're going to bathe in the dew from heaven. B'shiva idan and yachlufun Allah. 7 years or time periods will pass. Adisinda dishalat ilah b'malchus anasha. Ulaman diyitzbe yitzim. 7 periods of time will pass, and then finally, do you know what you will realize? You will realize that really God is in charge. God is in charge of everything. And the only people who have dominion over anything is whomever God chooses. Okay. Pasuk V'di amaru lemishpak ikar sharshoni, and when it says that the stump will be in the ground. Middle of Chav Gimel. Malchusach loch kayama. Your kingship, your kingdom will stand. Min di sinda di shalitin shmaya. Your kingdom will stand essentially and will continue to go until Hashem basically decides that it should be taken away from you. Now, Pasuk Chavdal, the interesting part. Lahain. Now he says the following thing, which is odd. Malka milki yishbar alach v'chatach b'tzidka piruk. Daniel gives Nebuchadnezzar something he did not say before. He says, now I have some advice for you. This is what's happening to you. And I have some advice, which is you can save yourself and redeem yourself b'tzidka, by giving charity, giving tzedakah. Va'avayasach b'michan anayin, and you'll support the poor people. Hein tevei arka l'shel lishleva seich. This will give you, this will help you endure. Okay, that's what he says there. So what happens ultimately? The rest of the parak basically describes that. So that happened. It says after 12 months, Nebuchadnezzar is on his palace roof, and he looks out and he says, this whole country, Babel, it's all me. Everything's for me. I'm in charge. I'm the king. I'm the best. And what happens? At that point, the dream starts to unfold. And it says he basically turns into this like monster type of thing, and he's out living with the animals. And eventually he comes back to himself. Okay, so that's overall essentially the story here. So lots to discuss. Let's start first with Okay, let's skip down to Hey on the Marmakomos, which is what exactly is going on here. If we would read this, normally we would say this is like a medrash. What happened? Nebuchadnezzar turned into like a werewolf, and like what's really happening? So the Malbim says as follows. He says, Kfar be'er mahari, shelo kedivrei ha'omrim, shenes hapech l'shor mamish, b'shem v'geder umara. Nebuchadnezzar did not actually turn into an animal, he says. That's not what happened here. V'im kain, why? Eich kishenasa einav lamarom. How is it possible that after these 7 periods of time passed, he picks up his eyes to heaven and shav da'ato ilav, and he kind of comes back to being human? Now, I don't know why that necessarily is a question, right? I mean, Hashem could make him into an animal, Hashem could turn him back human. But he says, it's not that he really didn't turn into an animal. Eich efshar sheyeh adam ubal chayachad. How can he be animal and human at once, right? And then he says, V'od, im nahapech l'shor v'nalam guf Nebuchadnezzar v'ta'aro mebnei adam, eich niskay malchuso. Like, what happened? Like, he's the king. So, like, who filled in? Like, what happened? Right? The king, all of a sudden, breaking news. The king is now an animal. Like, what? It's odd. Right? Ve'ech lo mardu ba'avadav. He says, like, wouldn't everyone just, like, storm the palace? Like, the king turned into an animal. So skip to the end of the 3rd line of the Malbim. He says, what's going on here?
I'm looking at it, I thought he was saying that, how could he reclaim the throne? They're gonna say he's an imposter.
Thank you. Eich lo mardu ba'avadav ba'amram k'rameis hamelech.
He became a shard, that means he disappeared from view.
Oh, thank you. I was correct. I read it incorrect. Thank you. Right. Meaning, if he became assured, then how afterwards was he able to reclaim the throne? People would say, this is not him really, or something like that, right? Because we know our king turned into an animal, he disappeared. Thank you. Yeah. So he says, Aval, amitas ha'inyan is what? Bi'er Daniel bepisrono b'mashikasa b'lech tardin min anasha. What happened, so the Malbim says, is hainu shegavra bo hamara hashechora al devar hapela b'shir muflag. That he basically went through some kind of psychiatric, some kind of mental illness, and he basically, right, mara shechora is like a black mood, like he was, struck with some kind of mental illness. Shu me'atzmo hayamois b'nei adam, that people were disgusted by his behavior and the way he was acting. Ubareach mehem, and people, like, he ran away from people stayed away from him. B'shochin b'midbaros yachidi, and he basically is out there living alone. And he basically says, like, he didn't actually turn into an animal, but he's going through some, like, psychotic state, and people were, completely disgusted by this. Okay, so and most of the Mefarshim basically seem to understand it that way, that he doesn't actually turn into an animal. He goes through some, very difficult period of time, and eventually he somehow comes back to himself. So what exactly is happening here? So if you remember, a big part of one of the things we pointed out about Nebuchadnezzar was that, it says in the Navi in Yirmiyah, that what happened, that Nebuchadnezzar was sent by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. And Yirmiyahu Hanavi says a nevuah about Nebuchadnezzar, Perek Chav Zayin, Sefer Yirmiyah, right? And basically Hashem says what? Klal Yisrael has done these things. I'm bringing somebody to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. No one's going to stop him. And Nebuchadnezzar, though, sees all of this accomplishment in his life as what? As completely, right, not involving Hashem. Hashem is totally not involved there. And it's all himself. And what seems to be going on here is, this is going to be the final straw of Nebuchadnezzar. That's it. He's finished after this. Is that, we think about it, what is a human being, essentially? Right? What is the concept? What is a human being? So you go back to Bereshis, when Adam was created, right? Mankind was created on the same day as what? As the animals, right? Except for what? Except that we have the neshama from Hashem, right? That Hashem blows into mankind the neshama. And the Medrash even says, the Medrash says that, there's a Medrash, it says like that, when Adam got the neshama, so the animals are all like something like they're like, I don't know, like this, they're bowing down to him, something like that. It says they're bowing down to him. They're seeing Adam as God almost. And Adam says, no, I'm not God. God created you, the animals, and he created me, right? But what's the Medrash conveying? The Medrash is conveying is that, right, we say this in davening, right? That the difference between mankind and animal is, in a certain sense, very subtle, but in a certain sense, very great, right? The difference is that we have this element of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the neshama. And when that is void of a person, essentially a person is what? is essentially an animal.
Very smart.
A very smart animal, yes, right. But right. So Nebuchadnezzar fails to have the Hashem component in his life. And this seems to be like a recurring theme for him, right? You're the big statue, right? You make this big statue, you have this dream about this big thing, but what's going to happen? Parak base, right? The rock is going to come, Hashem is going to come, Hashem's really controlling everything. The only reason you have any power in your life, Nebuchadnezzar, is because God decides to grant it to you as part of its plan. And here as well, right? So you are this tree, you're providing for everything, but ultimately what's going to happen? The Malach is going to come, it's going to chop you down because God is really riding the, God is playing everything out here. And you're just a piece of that puzzle. Okay, now that kind of plays into the next idea, which is so there's a question here which Chazal are bothered by, which is why does Daniel give Nebuchadnezzar this advice? You would think the last thing he should do is he should not give him advice. Why would you want to tell the person how to help himself if it's Nebuchadnezzar, right? You should say, oh, here's a dream of your downfall. Great, that's it. Sorry, can't help you. Right? It's a little odd. He says, and by the way, you'll be like Moshe telling, and if you want to, get on Hashem's good side, this is what you should do. So the Medrash asks this question in source Aleph, and the Medrash says the following thing. Why on earth would Daniel, who's a tzaddik, give advice to this Rasha to give tzedakah? Why would he do that? He sees the Jewish people, and they are in this situation in Bavel, and they're in a really low state. Mitultolim, devuyim barav, some of them are starving, they're not treated well. Lefichach, hisiu eitza kazu berachmanuso alehem. So the Medrash says this is part of Daniel's plan to really actually help out Klal Yisrael. Meaning he tells the king what to do, and yes, will it help the king? It will help the king, but it's really also indirectly going to help the Jewish people because he's going to have to provide for them. So the Jews will benefit from this as well. Now, does that make what Daniel did okay or not okay? Right? Meaning that's a hard question. The Jews might need something, but now, so at the expense of Nebuchadnezzar getting good advice and getting a zechus. So if you look at the Gemara in Os Gimel, by source Gimel, the Gemara Bava Basra says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Mipnei ma ne'enash Daniel. Why was Daniel punished? Now, we don't know where he's punished yet. We're going to see that later. Come back next week, hopefully, 2 weeks. So why was Daniel punished? Mipnei shehisi etza leNebuchadnezzar. Because he gave Nebuchadnezzar the good advice to give tzedakah. So it's not clear to me whether the Gemara is giving an alternative perspective here, right? The Medrash says he was doing it really to get the help for Klal Yisrael, and the Gemara says, no, he wasn't doing it for that. He was just trying to give him good advice, and that wasn't acceptable, and for that he's punished. Or whether the Gemara is complimenting the Medrash, and the Gemara is saying, despite the fact that he had good intentions, this was still not the right thing to do. So that part's not clear to me. And that's a good, that's like a major. What'd you say?
Either way, he did something wrong.
Okay, well,
There's a huge difference.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's what I'm suggesting. I don't know if the Medrash is portraying him as doing. The Medrash seems to say like, how could he have done such a thing? It says, well, he was doing it because the Jews were getting benefit. So is the Medrash trying to explain why really, indeed, he didn't do something wrong, or the Medrash is just saying this is what his thought process was, but it really wasn't.
The Medrash is defending his actions, but not necessarily saying that it was correct.
Correct. That's what's not right.
So the Gemara they could be insane, but they can also not be.
Correct. Right. That's what I'm saying. That's not clear to me whether.
What if he, okay, so he doesn't give Nebuchadnezzar the advice, and Nebuchadnezzar, something bad happens with Nebuchadnezzar. It's not like the Jews are now in control of their own destiny. It's not like they can go back to Jerusalem.
That's a good point. So why is it really a necessary component of this whole picture for him to give
Maybe
the?
they're happy, maybe not happy. Maybe like life is good for them at the current moment, or maybe life could be good for them at the current time. And so he gives them like if Nebuchadnezzar falls, so some other evil king comes and maybe he's worse for
His son, or whatever.
And they know that the nevuah, they have to wait 70 years, right?
Oh, okay, good. So maybe Ari's pointing out. Okay, so perhaps they know that this is all part of. He knows. So there's going to be some king along the way, and it's going to have to be 70 years either way you slice it. It's a good point.
Right, but I think the question in the Medrash in the Gemara is that despite the fact he's a Russia, and he shouldn't have been helping it, especially.
Yeah, I hear that.
His life was on the line,
I hear that.
but I hear your question, but I don't know if the Gemara is disagreeing with the measure, saying that Daniel, was just giving unsolicited advice, because, he worked for the king and he shouldn't have done that, or not.
Yeah, Ariel, were we?
Why is it bad? Telling you to give tzedakah, it's a good thing.
No.
Just accepting the Russian doesn't mean he doesn't deserve it.
Okay, so that's a good point. So if I would not have seen the Gemara, I would have, or the Medrash, I maybe would have taken that approach, right? It's like a very holistic approach, It's like, it's true. It's true. He's really a lousy guy. His mom is terrible. But why shouldn't we be helped? Why shouldn't we be giving good advice? So that's a good point. Yes, I don't know. I mean, Chazal do discuss it. It's not on the sheet, but in that Gemara in Baba Basra, they do talk a little bit about that, about giving the opportunity for Risha'im to have a zechus. So that's a good theological question, right? Like, where should we stand on that, right?
Giving a Russia an opportunity to do tshuva?
Correct. Meaning, well,
maybe that's the question.
Oh.
It didn't say, well, you could change your ways. It was more like you could do a mitzvah and then delay the punishment or get away with it. Like,
Okay.
Not necessarily telling him, to do tshuva.
Okay, so that was what I really wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure we touch on that. What exactly is this tzedakah doing, right? But to go back to our meaning, now I'm going to segue into what Ariel's bring up. But Ariel, your question is not a light one, right? It's like, how should we view us allowing and facilitating Rishonim to have a zechus? So the Gemara does deal with that, so I'm just saying that this kind of touches on that issue. So what exactly is going on with the tzedakah, right? So it says he gives tzedakah, and then what happens? He gives tzedakah, but eventually he turns into this animal like me.
Well, it delayed the punishment for 12 months.
Yeah, it said after 12 months, he's strolling on the roof of his palace and,
So it sounds like he stopped,
12
months maybe.
Okay, good. So I want to show you two perspectives on this, and it's important. This is the part where I think which it is helpful for us to think about in terms of tshuva and our ma'asim. Yeah, it's you. Or you're gonna say? Oh, very good. So you know the Gemara in Sota. Good. So Tzvi's mentioning the Gemara. The Gemara in Daled in Sota says the following thing. Okay, there's two ways to look at this. Let me put this out there and tell me what you'll say. We'll see what we come up with. Was he giving tzedakah for 12 months and then he stopped? Or did he give tzedakah and somehow that propelled his life for 12 months? We'll see the difference right now. Watch.
Well, the difference is whether he kept doing it,
So it says,
It's a huge difference, what I'm saying.
yes, it is.
The second way, if he keeps on doing it, it'll keep on preventing the punishment from happening. The
Oh,
other one is
correct.
The other one is just, it helps you for 12,
Exa-
gives you an extended,
Exactly. So that's what we're going to explore
delay,
now.
But then, not forever.
Correct. And that's right. So that's what I want to explore. Ari, you were saying that what? The pasuk doesn't specifically say. No, that's a valid point. Meaning it does not. Ari's pointing out, right? The pasuk really doesn't say that, right? The pasuk just says in 24, Chavdal, it says Daniel suggests him to give the tzedakah, and then in pasuk Chavav, it says after 12 months he's on the roof of his palace, and this is what happens. Oh, good. Okay, fine. So perhaps maybe he did not give it. Okay, that's also a good way to look at it. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Good. So Ari's pointing out, if you look at the text, there's no indication necessarily that he gave it, right? Maybe that's the point. Maybe Hashem said, have you given tzedakah, the whole thing wouldn't have happened. But you didn't. So I gave you 12 months. Okay. So the Gemara says, let's take a look at Daled. Rabbi Yishmael Omer. The Gemara is discussing there about what are the benefits and consequences of Torah, of studying Torah and doing good deeds. Do they have any, how can that protect a person and help them? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, this is just one facet of that Gemara, which is obviously a lengthy topic to discuss. How does that affect us in our lives? Not just making us better people, but can that actually protect us? Or is it, in Olam Haba, how does that work? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, doing ma'asim tovim, doing good deeds, can protect a person for shneim asar chodesh, for 12 months. Va'af al pi she'ein raya l'davar, zecher l'davar. Even though there's not a proof to the matter, there is a hint to this. And what is the hint to it? Tiksiv, and it quotes our pasuk, that he told him to give tzedakah, and it says after 12 months, what happened? Everything went downhill. So it's interesting. It
Why is
says,
it not a riot?
so why is it not a raya? Because I think what Ari said. Why is it not a proof? The Gemara says it's not a proof. It just maybe, it kind of touches on it.
And it's not a zecher either. If there's no evidence that he actually did it, like Ari's saying, in the psukim, I would say that.
It's even less than a zecher. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know how to handle that. I was thinking maybe along what Ari was saying, was that it's not so clear from the psukim that he gave the tzedakah, but it does say something about giving tzedakah, and the next thing we know, there's some kind of 12-month grace period.
That's good, but
So,
that there's no proof in the pasuk, because the text can be read like Ari, but it
correct.
sounds like.
But it does sound like perhaps that's what's going on.
Stop 36 months for if you want to get.
Yes. So the Gemara gives, that's what I'm saying. I took it, this is only where the Daniel pasuk is quoted. But yes, as Tzvi is pointing out, that Gemara gives lots of other things also about giving tzedakah, and it counts because it can protect you from a few different things. So a few different, you keep on multiplying it, it gives you more months, and Torah protects you. Yeah. So the Gemara does say that. If you go back to source Aleph, though, it's interesting. Source Aleph, we already read this, but now let's take a look at the second paragraph. And it says here, Miyad Pasach Oso Rasha, Otzrosav. So the Medrash seems to say that he starts to give tzedakah, but now watch what it says. V'chilek lahem l'shnei masar chodesh. He is helping people for 12 months. So it's not like a one-time ticket and he got a free pass. He is actively involved in giving tzedakah, but then what happens? Shochach oso rasha es hachalom. The dream wore off. And he's strolling on the palace. Shama kol haman sakas hanin lefnei Torah. He hears people begging for food. Please, please, please help us. Amar la'avodav ma kol zeh shani shamei. And he says, what's all that noise? Amar lo, they said, ha'aniyim, the poor people, sheheglesa, that you took into captivity. Tovim parnasasam. They're waiting for help. Miyad nichnas bo ayin ra'ah. At that point, he kind of changes and he says, this is the Babylon which I built. It's all mine. Why are you people coming to me for help? You know, I'm in charge here. I'll decide who I want to help, who I don't want to help. Get out of here. So it's interesting, and I think it's very. The Medrash
on the Gemara.
Right. The Medrash clearly implies that that he did. It wasn't a one-time thing. That he was giving the tzedakah, and the tzedakah was helping. Now, one could still ask, like,
It doesn't work for 12 months. It works for what you're doing.
Very good. It works for as long as you're doing it. Now, why does that work? Right? Meaning we don't believe we don't believe in buying God off. I can't buy him off. Was I give tzedakah, so he keeps pushing it off?
That same question you could ask.
That what?
12 months.
I forget which one it was. They couldn't reach the wall, but actually it stopped them coming because it was cut off by the fastest thing you would ever.
It then seems to allow that. Okay, good. So I think you can answer similar things. It's just an important yesod, right? Is that how do we see philosophically what's going on? Presumably, I think one way to look at it is that, right, you know, at least with the tzedakah, the Karban Tamid also could fit in here, but the tzedakah is more clear, is that, right, he's giving tzedakah. So he's having rachmanus on people. Now, really, as it should be, is that really, yeah, it's sort of like a media connect media, right? I mean, what's happening? He's giving tzedakah. So he's having rachmanus on people. So God is having rachmanus on him. He's not buying God off, and it's not like a one-time, not like the Medrash saying, it's not a one-time ticket. You just do it, and then like green light, and I can ride on it for like a certain amount of time. It's I'm doing something, and really something should have been happening to him. And Hashem says, you know, you really deserve this, right? The Mesilas Yesharim talks about this when he talks about Rachman and Hashem, you know, how he interacts with us. And he says, you know, really, Hashem, you know, we're doing certain things, and we deserve certain things in payback. And then how do we fit in Rachamim? And he says, essentially, that's what's going on, is that, you know, we're behaving in a certain way. And Hashem says, he's being Merachim ala Brios. I'm going to have Rachmanas on him. But what's the end of Nebuchadnezzar? That has to, we have to make sure that that's not our end, right? What ends up happening with Nebuchadnezzar is what? Is that he forgets about that.
Now, it's a big chiddush. If you say that Mahala, if you say the media connected media Mahala, it's tremendous chiddush because it comes out even though he's Shema. Meaning he did it because Daniel told him.
Good.
That's
a valid point.
He may have not have the kavanah.
That's a great point, right?
It's not really a chiddush because I mean that's the same thing.
Mitoch
Chazal by Oid and Avram.
Very good. That Hashem is still gonna.
That's a curse of Torah. But I'm saying maybe
This is a different thing. Good. Ari's pointing out for the people on Zoom. Ari's saying that it is interesting if you say it's a Mida Keneged Mida issue, that, you know, he's not really doing this L'Shem Shemayim, right? He's doing it because Daniel told him to. So anyway, you know, so that's essentially what happens to Nebuchadnezzar here. Essentially at the end of the parak, that's basically it. And that's all we hear of Nebuchadnezzar. It says he goes back and he returns to his his being the king. And he looks up one day and he says, look, Hashem is really, the Kol Yachol, Hashem is in charge of everything. And he goes back on he returns to becoming the king. And if you look at the last pasuk of the parak, right? Ka'an, Anon Nebuchadnezzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar, he writes in this letter, right? He says, Mishabach u'meromein, I praise and I exalt. Umahadar l'melech Shemaya, the king in heaven. Yikol ma'avodohi kashot, right? Everything Hashem does is emistic. And he comes to this realization, apparently, for a certain amount of time. And then that's, the parak ends, and then we don't hear of Nebuchadnezzar ever again. So that's the close of Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to move into the next king, but essentially, we got a good glimpse into this.
It could be like that, when he returned, right at the end of his reign, and he may have died,
Yeah, he died short, presumably. Yeah, I mean that's what the Mepharshim assume. It's not so clear, but that's
Otherwise, why are we going to next king?
Yeah. So I would think it never struck me, but I think a big, I don't know the thing, but a big thing that comes out of Nebuchadnezzar, I think, is definitely this concept, right, which we see in the Torah, right, which is like this concept of like kochi v'otzim yadi asali asachayil hazeh. Right, it says in the Torah, you're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, and the Torah says, Hashem says, you're going to say, Kochi v'otzim yadi, asali yisachayil zeh. It's all my doing that I accomplished all this, everything that I have, all the gashmis that I have, it's all me. And I think a big driving point, here to Nebuchadnezzar that Hashem is trying to drive home is that you are a player in the game, and we're all players in the game, and hopefully we're obviously, Baruch Hashem, our role isn't the Nebuchadnezzar role. Although that's a good discussion, if he would have kept his role exactly as it is, so would that have been a bad thing? The Rambam and the Ramban talk about that. Like, had he kept his role and did exactly what Hashem wanted him to do to the T, so then he just would have been playing a piece in Hashem's big picture of history, and maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. But perhaps he pushed it. He was put in a position and he did certain things, but he went further than he should have, and he abused that, and that turned him into what he was. Yeah.
Is that true? Is that actually recognizing Hashem?
That's a great question. Yes, the people on Zoom, Ariel's asking, like, when we have this burst of inspiration. I mentioned it last week. That's something we can learn also. We have this burst of inspiration. He's clearly recognizing 2 times already that he recognized Hashem is the king, Hashem is it, Hashem is everything. And then we kind of like revert back. So like, does he get schar?
He found out even the very first time Hashem.
Yeah.
He said it and then it was back.
And it was right. So yeah. But with Nebuchadnezzar we see it recurring. So Ariel's asking, like, is he getting some schar for that burst of inspiration? So I don't know. I mean, there is this concept that, like, Hashem gives us this burst of inspiration, and we have that because without that we wouldn't be able to get ourselves going and to do the hard work itself. Right? Rabbi Tatz talks about this in his book. I think it's called Living Inspired. Is that what it's called? I think he talks about it there. Right? How like Hashem gives us this burst and this taste of like the end result of like what the accomplishment of doing good is. And that's like our taste of that. And that's like the drive to get us to now to start working and going forward. And the goal, what he wants of us, is to not forget that, even though it's going to start to become stale and peter out, but to keep that going. So I don't know, is he giving us schar for that? Or is that whole thing only a heicha timtza? It's only a way to propel you forward, but the real schar is later on. That's beyond my pay grade. I don't know.
I did realize something.
Yeah.
It could be, but this is Rabbi Shmuel. It could be what he says is via davar, not seichel davar. Maybe he's learning definitely stuff that was given, but his only shaila is it like the measures that are 12 months because you're doing it for 12 months?
Ooh, very good.
Or because
I didn't think of that also. Very good. Okay. Ari's pointing out, excellent, right? Meaning maybe in the Gemara saying it's not clear whether he continued to give the tzedakah or whether he did it at one time. Excellent. So next week, Parak Hay is the next king. We'll begin just with a background of who Belshazzar is, where he comes from. And some people might know the famous story. They're at a big party, right? Drinking out of the kingdom of the Beis Hamikdash, and the hand is writing on the wall. So that's next week. Yeah.
Belshazzar was his grandson. He was another king.
Yeah, so we'll discuss that a little bit. Evam Rodach, and he's absent. Yeah. Seems to be Okay, so we'll try to discuss that at the beginning of next week. Yashkrach, have a great Shabbos.